Hi all, welcome to my channel again. So today we are going to discuss about Kubernetes important interview questions part 2. Part 1 I have already posted on my YouTube channel. So please go and watch before starting this. So I have mentioned everything in this blog. If you want to check out this blog, you can check that from this link which I will be keeping in the description box. Okay, so let's start. So first question is what is a namespace in Kubernetes? Which namespace any pod takes if we don't specify any namespace? Okay, so normally you might have heard the namespace in Kubernetes. It is something like a subcluster. So namespace is the methodology of categorizing a single cluster into multiple subclusters in an organization. So as I said, so if you are creating a single cluster, then these namespaces are the multiple subclusters within that. So these subclusters are then managed by different teams that can interact and share information between them. For example, you have created a cluster where we are having two namespaces. Let's say one is the test and the other is the UAT. So inside that there will be the pods will be different for the test cluster, same as goes through the UAT cluster. So that's why these are called as a subcluster, which will be having their separate pods. So while the clusters can function all autonomously, they are still connected to other clusters and aren't completely independent and can even support one cluster nested within another. Okay, so in general, there is a default namespace where all the resources exist. So that's how you can answer the question. And the next question is how does Ingress help in Kubernetes? Ingress defines a set of rules that allows the inbound connection of the external world to access Kubernetes cluster services. So what is Ingress is in Kubernetes? It allows our external world to access our Kubernetes cluster services. So an ingress controller needs to be installed for this. When the external IP hits the ingress controller, what it does, it will route to the Kubernetes endpoints. From there, it will access the data. So that's how ingress works. If this question is asked, then you can answer like that. And next is explain different types of services in Kubernetes. So node ports, cluster IP, and load balancers are different ways to get external traffic into a Kubernetes cluster. So these three are the things which we use to handle this external traffic which is coming to the Kubernetes cluster. So the first one is the cluster IP service. So this is the default type of service in Kubernetes. It creates a service inside the Kubernetes cluster which can be accessed by the other applications in the cluster without allowing external access. So that's how it works. And the node port, you might have heard the nodes inside the Kubernetes cluster. They will be the worker nodes. Uh, so these nodes, node port will be there. So that will act as a service which will open a specific port on the all the nodes in the cluster. Okay, whatever the working nodes are there it will open a port, and any traffic sent to that port is forwarded to the service. The service cannot be accessed from the cluster IP. Okay, so that's how it works. In so this works through the port. Next is the load balancer. So load balancer is the most commonly used service type for Kubernetes networking. You might have heard load balancer so many times outside. So it is a standard load balancer service that runs on each pod and establishes a connection to the outside world, either to networks like the internet or within your data center. So that's how it works. Can you explain the concept of self-healing in Kubernetes and give some examples of how it works? In Kubernetes, there is a concept called self-healing. So that's why the Kubernetes is largely used because of this feature. So the first way is to use replicas that you ensure the availability of the pods required to maintain the stability of the application. So first one is using the replicas, and the second one is to use the scalability with the which number of pods increased or decreased according to the application demand. So that will ensure the load stability on the application at all times. Okay, so that's how it works. And next is, how does Kubernetes handle storage management for containers? So you all know this Kubernetes is having a concept called persistent volume. So Kubernetes uses this persistent volume to keep the data intact with the containers. So Kubernetes persistence volume are administrator provided volume. So if whenever you want to use, you need to raise a request for the volume by issuing a persistent volume claim. So that's how you will get the access to store your storage or the data. So PVCs are describe the storage capacity and characteristics a pod requires, and the cluster attempts to match the request and provision the desired persistent volume. So that's how the storage management for the container works in Kubernetes. Next is how the node port works. I have already explained this in the above question. So how I will explain like just simply here. So to allow external traffic into the Kubernetes cluster, we are using the node port service type. So what it does, it will allocate a kubeproxy in the worker node allocates a port in the range of this. So that what it will do, it will open this port on the interface of every node, which is called node port, and connections to this port are then forwarded to the service cluster IP. Okay, so that's how it works. And the next one is what are multi-node cluster and a single node cluster in Kubernetes. Single node cluster is a basic infrastructure platform, whereas the multi-node clusters make up a Kubernetes multi-cluster environments. You can go like detail in this blog, which I have mentioned everything in this blog. I will be keeping this link in the description box. So the difference between the creating and applying in Kubernetes. So create, what it will do, it will create a file according to the defined configuration. Apply, what it will do, already whatever the Kubernetes application pod services deployments are there, it will apply the changes that to the already existing of these Kubernetes application pod services deployments. So that's all for today. That was the last question. So if you want to check out this blog, you can check that from this link I will be keeping in the description box. Thanks for watching.